following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and I'm living up to my promise to my audience. I talk to the most interesting people on the planet on a regular basis, and today is no exception. Mr. Michael Duca returning to the airwaves. How are you, sir?
I am quite well, thank you, Ralph. How about yourself? Have you recovered yet from the weekend with the Mets?
That's exactly what I wanted to talk. Your Giants, my Mets, in one of the most exciting series of 4 games that I've ever watched. And tell me if you didn't get the same reaction. Was that not an incredible series?
It was a joy to watch. It was an irritation to watch. You were on the edge of your seat the whole time. I cannot tell you how many text messages I sent to my wife, who manages all of the ushers and guest services people at the ballpark. I can't tell you how many unpleasant emojis she sent me along with the words, "Yay, more free baseball." So it's looked at differently by different people.
It wasn't just one game. It was like literally 4 games, 3 of them extra innings, and one where for some reason or another the teams decided to change uniforms.
It was, what's interesting, I will even slightly correct you, it was 5 games, because I believe that the entire series went 46 innings, which is long enough for 5 games plus a bonus.
Right. And if you're one of those people that are saying, well, let's take 4 seconds off the intentional walk rule, then you're not only missing the boat on it all, but you have no interest in this conversation. Because 46 innings in 4 games is quite a drudge to those who just have to be home early because too much good time at the ballpark, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I will tell you this. Throughout the press box Thursday night and again on Friday, a fairly constant subject of discussion was the fact that the 16-inning game never seemed to drag at any point in time. Everybody was saying, well, 4 hours and 45 minutes, but that's not bad for a 16-inning game. And they're right, it's not. It works out to roughly a 2.5-hour pace for a 9-inning game. And for a good chunk of that game, it looked like it was going to be even shorter than that. Through 7 innings, we were on pace for that game to go 2 hours and 5 minutes.
It was something else, and the last game, which the Mets could have even the series, would have been very frustrating for you guys along the way, but they didn't, and I came away as a Mets fan not feeling all that bad about being crunched. It was that kind of series. It was really tremendous.
It was a series where really you saw the value of pitching and defense. The 16-inning game really turned on. Well, it was a play that most people don't really remember, Ralph. It was a play that took a full year to develop. There was Pablo Sandoval hit a little looper into short left field, and Ahmed Rosario was running out, and gosh, help me with the left fielder's name. I'm forgetting who was out there on Thursday night.
Was it J.D. Davis, if I'm not mistaken, or...
It might have been. I'm not positive.
Might have been McNeil moving over in the late innings.
No, it was not McNeil. I think it was still Davis out there. And what people don't remember is that last year at Citi Field against the Giants, that same fly ball was hit. Only last year it didn't result in the ball clanking off the left fielder and rolling behind him. Last year it resulted in a collision and a concussion. Same players. And so now you have a little bit of the backstory as to why they both shied off at the last minute and the ball wound up playing them.
Yes. A concussion will stick with you for a long time. That becomes muscle memory in terms of shying off.
Yeah, I mean it both destroys and creates memories.
Exactly, and we joke about it, but this has really become not just baseball, especially football and hockey as well, a long-term effect on many of our beloved heroes in all sports, and this is a big problem.
It is, and what's interesting is that the Sharks, if we can diverge to hockey for a moment, the Sharks general manager, Doug Wilson, was the last player in the NHL grandfathered in and allowed to play without a helmet. The very last guy. And he's got a really interesting perspective on it. He feels that the requirement to wear helmets, and in some cases face shields for players, has created an entire league full of people who feel invincible because they're wearing protection, and who therefore are much more reckless out on the ice, both with their own safety and with the safety of others. He said that there were essentially no headshots back in the days when you could see the faces of the guys who were coming after you, and that while he acknowledges that they were not very good at necessarily diagnosing concussions in his day, he's still insistent that there were far fewer of them.
Whoa, very interesting perspective coming from someone who, when you started the conversation, they grandfathered him in. The first thing I thought of, the kind of person who wants to be grandfathered in to something like that is, shall we say, reckless, but his quote on that is far from reckless. It brings a new perspective. It's very realistic.
Yeah, he was a defenseman. They are known for physical play, and in his day, defensemen could get in the crease and kind of beat up the other players, and you saw a lot of serious physical play on the ice in his day, and yet it was pretty much limited to the numbers and below. And you just
let me add something to that, Michael. When I was a kid, I'd go, growing up in New York, I'd go down for autographs to the hotels and what have you, and I loved hockey players were so genteel. They were off the ice. They leave all their aggressions on the ice. Good with kids, patient, all of those things. I don't know how it is today with players. They weren't certainly a far cry from being millionaires that they are today. My point is, though, I'd see guys come in on a regular basis, and I could remember guys being heavy-duty scars on their face from stitches, fresh stitches.
Yep.
A week later, healed over with scar tissue. More scars the week after that. More. My point is, these helmets, Doug Wilson's comments notwithstanding, the more I think about it, there were a lot of guys getting cut up in the 50s and 60s.
Well, there were, but what you saw for the most part there was goaltenders. I think the famous shot that people can go on Google and look for is
Jacques Plante.
Terry Sawchuk. First
okay.
of all, is there a better hockey name? There just isn't. Terry Sawchuk, who was a great goaltender in his day and played without a mask. And I believe he was the last goalie to play without a mask, if I'm not mistaken. And if you look on Google Images, you can find a composite image of all 200-some stitches that were taken in his face laid over his photograph at one time. And it's pretty impressive. It looks like a railroad yard.
Right. These guys had a different mentality, for sure.
But I will tell you this about modern players.
Michael, it wasn't just goaltenders I'm talking about. It was hockey players that played without a mask, without protection, without a shield.
I mean, the puck still flew. The puck was still flying through the air, and it was still going 100 miles an hour or more.
Right.
If Al McNeil was on the other end of it, it was going 120 miles an hour. And, it is true that it's a dangerous sport. There's no question about that. The thing that most people think about when they think of hockey and danger is probably its least dangerous aspect, and that's fighting. There's a protocol to fighting in hockey, and you got to remember that you've got guys taking punches at other guys who are on a friction-free surface. You're not planted in the ground. When you get hit, you slide because you're on ice. And, your whole body absorbs that. And so it is a lot less grotesque than it looks to the outside world. Having said that, you asked about modern hockey players in passing, and I just want to tell you this. I once asked a young player on the Sharks about why hockey players seem to be so down to earth, so genuine and with just no pretense. And he laughed and he said, "You do realize that a third of the guys in this league come from towns smaller than the arenas we play in."
Wow. Yes.
I mean, perhaps the best known Shark of all time, Patty Marleau, comes from a town named Aneroid, Aneroid, in Saskatchewan. And if you were to go to Google Earth and look at Aneroid, you would see that there are exactly 3 streets in the town. There's one 2-story building. I mean, these guys are from the prairies and from, a lot of them are from rural places in Canada, or rural places in Sweden, rural places in Russia. It's a very, very different thing. This is kind of like what baseball was like in the early 20th century, where it was just kids coming off farms and playing.
Right. Hey, Michael, let me ask you your favorite baseball movie. Totally off the subject. You mentioned that baseball in the 20s. I want to know if it. I have 2 that I'm thinking of, but what is your all-time favorite baseball movie?
Well, I'm going to ask you to qualify that for me. Is a baseball movie a movie that has a lot of baseball in it, or is it a movie that's entirely about baseball?
Entirely about baseball.
All right.
How about...
So to me,
I'll break it down
to
the 2 that I keep going back and forth to. Field of Dreams and the Bob Redford movie, name skips my mind.
The Natural.
The Natural. Those are the 2 that I've... And there were others. Major League was right up there for a long time. That could be my trilogy. That should be a good question in itself. Because there's no right or wrong about any of this. What's your trilogy of baseball movies? Developed the topic.
I'm going to take you right off the top and tell you that, first of all, while I had the pleasure of meeting the author of Shoeless Joe, which is the book on which Field of Dreams was based, and spending an hour with him at his home up in rural Canada, up on the Fraser River, I don't consider Field of Dreams to be a baseball movie. To me, Field of Dreams is a movie that has a lot of baseball in it. Field of Dreams, to me, is a movie about the relationship between fathers and sons, which is a very different thing. As far as pure baseball movies, I've got, there's so many, it's hard for me to break it down. I love The Natural, but how could you not? It's a classic story written by a brilliant author, Bernard Malabud.
Right.
But at the same time, I would have to say that in the realm of pure baseball movies, you kind of have to save some room for Friday the Yankees, I think.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Hey, I got to take a quick second,
period,
Michael, to say Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko with Michael Duca. Go on, Michael.
All right. From that same time period, the Monty Stratton story was a really good movie, I thought. But modern times, you look and there's some movies that have a lot of baseball in them that aren't pure baseball movies that I still really enjoy.
Hard to say where it crosses the line. There was so much baseball-related stuff in Field of Dreams.
There was.
Right.
But I don't feel like baseball was the reason for the movie. Baseball was the metaphor for explaining relationships between fathers and sons and the indivisibility of that relationship over time. The famous speech that Arby's, we have the meats, James Earl Jones delivers, where he tells Ray, for it is money they have and the time and love which they lack. That to me, if you listen to that speech carefully, it's a prose reprise of Jim Croce's Cat in the Cradle, and that's to me what that movie is about. It happens to use baseball as an expository form. I guess in much the same way that Bad News Bears used baseball as an expository form, and the Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars to make greater points about society. But those were to me, those were baseballish movies, but they weren't baseball movies.
Okay. Again. Yeah, it's close.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes. So
I mean, I feel like if a movie is trying to make a greater point and utilizes baseball as a microcosm of society to make that point, then it's not really a baseball movie, but it's a movie that has baseball in it as a central theme. The one movie that maybe straddles the line and lives in both worlds is the Jackie Robinson story.
Yes, for sure. But you can't say it's a baseball movie, and you can't say it's purely a non-baseball movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's right on that line. Do you agree
Absolutely.
that Bill Veeck would have been the first to have integrated had Branch Rickey not, or had Branch Rickey's had it failed with Branch Rickey?
I think that Bill Veeck thought about it. I think he probably would have loved to have had Larry Doby and Satchel Paige earlier than he had them. But I also think that he was unpopular enough with his fellow owners that he knew that he could not be the pioneer there.
Yeah.
The pioneer had to be somebody from New York. It's kind of like, I liken Ricky breaking the color barrier to, we knew for 20 years we needed to have diplomatic relations with Red China, but you had to have a conservative Republican president like Nixon to actually do it. Otherwise, it would have been shredded politically. But when the devout Christian New Yorker Brooklynite integrates baseball, then it becomes hard to argue against. And
he had the perfect city to do it in.
Yeah. I mean, Brooklyn was at the time. That was before. Wasn't that before the boroughs all consolidated into a single city? I believe it was. And
I don't think there was ever a time when the boroughs weren't consolidated into a single city. It was New York.
I know there were, Ralph. I know there was, because for a long time Brooklyn had city limit signs that proclaimed it the fifth largest city in the United States.
Yes, but okay. I don't know.
Queens had individual cities of its own. Still does.
Individual areas of its own, but not.
Well, it has cities. There are cities in Queens. Well,
I grew up in Jackson Heights, New York, Queens, which was in Queens. They called it sections of Queens, not cities.
I think you will find that I could be wrong about this. I'm not a native New Yorker, as are you, and I should probably just shut up. But I think you will find that there are some city halls sprinkled around Queens, and I think there are some places there that actually elect mayors.
They elected officials, but they don't call them mayors.
Okay.
That's all. Just because it's one big city with 5 boroughs, and to the best of my knowledge,
it is now. That's absolutely true. But I was certainly under the impression that.
Listen, I've been wrong 78 times today, so I'm going to do my homework about it. I'm just telling you what I think is that it was formed as a city. Manhattan is New York, called New York City, but it's a borough of Manhattan, and
yes. Queens
is encompassed by Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island are all encompassed by, they are under the auspices of being in the city of New York. So, but I will check it, Michael.
Yeah, they are. I agree with you that they are now, but I believe there was a time. I think if you go back and look at the United States Census records, I think if you look around 1910 and 1920, you'll find some really interesting things, like the fact that San Francisco was one of the 5 largest cities in the country at the time, and that when you look at census records going back over the years, I mean, there were suburbs of Philadelphia that were folded into Philadelphia between censuses, and all of a sudden, Philadelphia jumps in population by like 400,000.
Early gerrymandering.
Yeah, something like that. And my recollection is that New York boroughs were reported as separate cities in the census for a while in the early 20th century.
That is absolutely very possible.
But one thing we know for sure, it had its own baseball team. It even had its own football team for a while.
And they have a wonderful minor league team called the Brooklyn Cyclones, which is short A, entry league in the I think it's in the Penn League, and they have Staten Island. The Yankees have Staten Island in that same league. So a purist might say that's small potatoes. But
well, a purist might.
There's never been a team more
right
missed.
Next to Coney Island.
Right, exactly. It's Keystone Park for those keeping score at home. And there has never been, of all the carpetbagging teams in baseball history, in sports history, there's never been a more missed team, and there's never been a team whose being gone did more to deteriorate the spirit of a borough or of a section or a city, whatever you want to call it. It was horrible, both from the New York Giants standpoint and from the Brooklyn standpoint. I will contend that baseball would have been better off had they expanded a little earlier in response to the Continental League, and the Dodgers became the LA Angels or whatever you want, whatever, Hollywood Stars, whatever you want to call them, and the Giants became the Seals. That's just my opinion. What say you?
I think that it would have been very, let's put it this way, San Franciscans, I know, were convinced that the Seals were playing a better brand of baseball than the lower half of the major leagues, and they might have been right.
I'm sure they were.
PCL,
that was an incredibly powerful league.
Yeah, the PCL was a very potent league. At one point in time, they played a 190-game season. The Seals seemed to be a pipeline to the Yankees. They sent player after player after player after player up there. Frankie Crosetti, Tony Lozeri, a whole string
Charlie
of DiMaggios
Silvera
went to the major leagues. Charlie Silvera.
Right.
Well, Charlie didn't come through the Seals, but he came from San Francisco. But he did not come through the Seals. He played for a team called the Keneally Yankees, which was a semi-pro team sponsored by Keneally's Bar, and his teammates on that team were Jerry Coleman and Bobby Brown, and all three of them were
where were they?
signed
Where were
simultaneously.
they on Pearl Harbor Day? Tell that story.
Well, they were all they were playing baseball in Alameda, California, at Washington Park.
Right. Where we both have spent an awful lot of time. I would say it's among the 20. I can't pick a number. Best parks in the United States. That's a great park. Yeah.
It's certainly a delightful area, and it's got the great history. Yep.
Yes, and the field itself, given the stars that played winter ball at that park, I get goosebumps walking through there. Really and truthfully.
Someday we can just talk about the history of sports in Alameda and the fact that the first professional baseball game played in the state of California was on the site of, it was basically at the foot of Webster Street, where there's currently a very popular watering hole down there on the corner. And the home plate umpire for that game was the then heavyweight champion of the world. I believe it was Jack Johnson, but I'm not positive.
Whoa. That's very interesting. Right down the block from there's the site of a Japanese stadium, Japanese league that they had going in the early 20s as well. So much about Alameda. Dick Bartell lived here. Bill Kennedy, if I'm not mistaken. Bill Kennedy, the catcher's father, who was a coach with the A's. Anyway,
Bob. Bob.
Bob Kennedy.
Bob Kennedy.
Kennedy, right.
Yeah, I just saw Terry this weekend.
How is he doing?
He's great. He's great. He's a scout, and you will appreciate this, Ralph. When I see Terry, we never talk baseball. Never.
Really?
We always talk about what books we're reading.
Are they baseball books at times?
Rarely.
Okay.
Terry loves science fiction, and he also likes historical fiction, and he's not averse to reading nonfiction. I got him right now reading perhaps the definitive book on the history of New York City called City of Dreams. And it's a 400-year history of immigration and immigrants and how they shaped New York.
Wow. You've got my attention, being the son of one immigrant. I will look for that. Hey, look, thank you, Michael. You'll excuse the way our conversation skips from one thing to another. That's how my mind works, and I'd like to thank you for playing the home edition.
It was always a pleasure, and it continues to be. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Michael. Next time you're in Alameda, let's get together. We'll get you and Jerry Feidelstein, and we'll have lunch at Nathan's on Webster. How about that?
All right. Sounds like a plan.
And I'll even call him Feidelberg, his real name. How about that?
Well, yeah.
He deserves it.
That's all right. You just made him a rock instead of a city. It all works.
Okay. Be well, my friends. Stay healthy.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all. Adios.